This tutorial will show you how to configure your own custom stats in Fantasy Analyst, a new feature that was recently added in the app. One of the great things about Fantasy Analyst is that you can download multiple seasons worth of sports data directly to a database on your computer to use for your own analysis. With the ability for custom stats to be defined now in the app, you can make full use of this data in any way that you want. In this video, I'll show you an example of how to make a custom stat for NBA in Fantasy Analyst. We'll make a new simple stat that shows the number of days that have passed since a player has last played in a game. Defining custom stats in Fantasy Analyst will require the use of SQL, a programming language for manipulating databases. I'm going to assume that the majority of people watching this have never used SQL, so I'll try to carefully explain each step as I go along without giving a full lesson on SQL. However, it's not difficult to learn the basics of how it works fairly quickly, even if you don't have any programming experience. If you haven't used it before, I recommend looking at the first couple of pages on the website here to get a better idea of how SQL works before watching the rest of this video. That being said, if you don't want to learn SQL but still have a custom stat that you want to use, just post a request on the Fantasy Analyst forums, and I can try to help write the command for the stat that you're trying to make. Let's bring up Fantasy Analyst now and open the custom stat editor. I've already chosen a DraftKings NBA slate for today, so I'll start by clicking the Edit Columns button in the Player Projections window. If you scroll all the way to the bottom of the Available Columns window, you'll see that there are 10 custom stats available to edit. These are saved separately across each sport, so we can have 10 custom stats per sport. Let's edit one of these by clicking it, and then clicking the Edit Custom Stat button on the bottom right. You will now see the custom stat editor. In the top left section, we can rename our custom stat and either save it or cancel without saving. To the right of this, we have a menu for selecting a player that we want to test our custom stat command on, along with a button we can click to execute that command. In the middle section, we have a text area where we can write our SQL command for the custom stat. The first few lines here are just comments, meaning they won't be executed with the actual command we write. In SQL, comments are denoted with 2 hyphens, as you can see here. The last line, however, is an actual SQL command. This is just a default command that's provided for the custom stats before you write your own. Finally, the bottom section shows the output of our command after we click the Execute SQL button. Let's choose a player and execute the default command. Without going over the command itself, I'll just let you know that what it does is find the last 20 database entries for the selected player, showing all columns. This is a good place to start because we can see what data we have available in the database. Before writing commands for your own stats, you need to have an idea of what is saved in the database and how you'll use that information in your commands. Let's take a quick look. Scrolling across horizontally, we can see all of the column names and values for the currently selected player. Most of the column names are self-explanatory. What we need to do now is come up with a new command for a custom stat that will only have a single value as a result. Showing multiple values like the current command does is good for testing and checking what our command is doing. However, we can only display a single value when we eventually place our custom stat column in the player projection window, so our final stat should only produce one value. As I previously mentioned, I'll create a stat showing how many days have passed since a player's last game for this example. This will let us know who is playing a back-to-back and may be tired from not having enough rest. The idea behind how we want to calculate this stat is pretty simple. We just want to find the last day the current player was in a game, and then subtract that from the date of the current game. To begin, I'm going to delete the default command so that we can put the new one together piece by piece. It's important for us to test the command as we put it together, and check the results to make sure that we're getting the correct value at the end. Although I already know what columns from the database we'll need to use for our new stat, you should explore these on your own to find which ones will be required in our command. For example, we can see that there's a date-time column that tells us when the player's game starts, which we will obviously need to make use of for this. I'll now go ahead and start writing a new command. The first thing I'm going to try to do is to get the date of the last game our selected player participated in. Here, select asterisk essentially means get all columns. NBA Game Stats is the name of the database table for NBA, so we write from NBA Game Stats to let the command know where it needs to get the data. We then use where to specify a condition that has to be true for all of the rows returned. Here, I'm requiring that the value in the player ID column has to be equal to the current player's player ID. As mentioned in the comments at the top, we can use brackets with the current player keyword, followed by a period and the property name, to get that property value from the currently selected player. All of the column names in the database are also property names that can be used with the current player keyword. After this, I add a condition for the minutes to be greater than 0, so that we are only looking at games where the player actually played. Next, I require that the dates for the rows must be less than the current date of the selected player. Finally, rows that represent historical game results rather than projections have a label property with a value of stat, so that must be specified as well. If we run this command, we'll see that the output updates. It should now be showing all game results before the current date for our selected player, where the number of minutes logged was greater than 0. If you want, you can check the column values to verify this. Let's change the asterisk after select to date time instead now. Doing this will return only the date time column rather than all columns. To get the last date of the game this player has played in from what we currently have, we'll need to make 2 more additions. First, we'll need to have order by date time descending added at the end of the command to order the dates from latest to earliest. Next, we'll need to add a top 1 after select. This will get the first date, which will be the latest after the way we ordered the data. Running the command again, you can see that we now only get the date and time for the last game this player participated in. We'll now have to subtract this date from the current date. First, let's make a local variable for the last game's date. To do this, we use the declare keyword, followed by the variable name with an @sign, and then the variable type. In SQL, dates can be saved as a datetime type. Next, we'll set the value of this variable equal to the last game date using the set keyword. Finally, we can use the dateDiff command in SQL to get the difference between the current date and our last game date variable. The first argument in the command gives the unit to measure the difference in, which will be days for us. Then we pass the 2 dates that we want to subtract. Running this command now, we finally get the output we want, a single value showing the number of days since this particular player last played a game. Now that our new stat is ready, we can rename it to something more appropriate. Let's change the name to days since last game and save it. If we now go back to the custom stats section in the column settings, we'll see our new stat as an option, and we can drag it to the selected columns window where we want to display it. You'll now see our days since last game column appear in the projections window. However, it's currently blank. For custom stats, we need to calculate them by selecting the players we want to display the stat for, right-clicking, and choosing Calculate Custom Stats. Doing this will calculate the results for any custom stats shown in the projections window. Once the process is complete, you'll now see that our days since last game column has values for all players. Just to double check that the values are correct, let's verify that it has been 3 days since Horford's last game by bringing up the player history window for him. Doing this now, we do in fact see that the last game he played was 3 days ago. This simple example showed how we can use SQL commands in Fantasy Analyst to create new custom stats using all of the information we have available from the saved databases of player statistics. Don't forget that if you're going to start writing commands for your own stats, it's important to double check your results and make sure that the command you've written is correct. You can copy and paste data from any of the tables in Fantasy Analyst directly into Excel, so I'd recommend doing this to double check any calculations you do. And again, if you got a bit lost while I was writing the SQL commands, feel free to ask for help on the Fantasy Analyst forums. I'll be more than happy to try to help you write the command for the stat that you want.